Well, Deborah Horne, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate that.
Well, okay. So we came across this story that you posted on Facebook about going back to your high school, of which you hadn't been back to in a lot of years. And it caught our attention because of what you said and how you had experienced some tough things back there.
Yeah, I will say that I was caught off guard actually by the strong emotions. I mean, I know where I grew up, I know the time I grew up in, but I hadn't been back in my high school since I graduated in 1971. And that's because the school stopped being a high school that year. That was the last year it was a high school. And it had been one since the late 1800s, I believe. And it became an intermediary school, which we never had intermediate schools in Newport News. That's why I was in high school from 8th to 12th grades. And so it was an intermediate school for a few years, 7 or 8. And then it became, I thought it was sold to the shipyard, the Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company, which is the largest shipyard in the world and figures prominently in the lives of almost everybody who lives in Newport News. Of course, my father worked there, and many fathers and some mothers worked there. And so it was no longer a high school and hasn't been one for certainly about 40 years. So I hadn't been back physically in the high school. And, we went in and we saw the cafeteria, but now the cafeteria is a gym. And so it didn't wasn't familiar to me. And then we went to the area where the classrooms are, but the classrooms are now sleeping quarters because by now the Navy uses it as a place housing for sailors while their ship is in dry dock being repaired in Newport News. And so it was only when and I was with another classmate, and she's African American as am I, and we walked into the hallway, and that is the same. And that was when suddenly I was 13 again. And on the very first day of classes as an eighth grader, and doing something I had never done before, which is change classes. And anybody who goes from a younger grade to a higher one knows that. I think that still happens. And I remember being frightened, certainly. As I wrote, I had never seen that many white people in that kind of close quarters. And this is 1966, I think. And then someone knocked my books out of my hand. And oh my gosh, it was like my worst fear had come true. And whoever it was looked as old as my parents to me. I'm sure he was 17 or 18, but he may as well have been 87, which is about the age I
Oh,
thought
okay.
my were.
So let's back up a second. So how did you end up at this high school?
Well, the way we ended up at the high school, and I was with the largest group of Blacks to integrate Newport News High School, is through freedom of choice. The South was very resistant after the Brown versus Board of Education to actually integrate its schools. And so many different methods were tried, and freedom of choice was one of them. And that was an early attempt at desegregating the schools in Newport News. And my parents, both college educated, both from southern states, my father from North Carolina, my mother from South Carolina, really wanted their kids to be a part of this historic moment.
So it was
And
the first class.
it was the largest class of African Americans at that school. There had been some in the past, but just a sprinkling. But this one, about a quarter of the students who went to that school now were Black students. And that had never happened
So
at
like
that,
overnight.
literally overnight.
Wow.
Whatever day in August that we went to school, it had gone from a truly, first, it was the first segregated white high school in Newport News. And then overnight, it had gone from a little sprinkling of people of color, but then just what must have felt like an avalanche of us, a quarter of us. But I wasn't afraid to go. I wasn't afraid to go to the high school because it felt like a time when we're participating in this extraordinary thing. We're getting to go to a school where, I mean, the books are new, The library is gigantic. They had two gymnasiums, one in the building and then a completely different building. I mean, it was like paradise, in that sense, because truly separate was not equal. Absolutely. There's no question about that. At Black schools, they had books that were discarded by the white schools and substandard equipment, substandard facilities. And so we were at the premier high school at the time in Newport News. So it was a great opportunity. And yet I think I didn't know enough to be afraid, really, because my parents were very excited. And so you sort of adopt the attitude of your parents. They were thrilled and we were making history. But being on the ground was really a different situation altogether, because we were in school with kids who had never really been around, white kids who'd never been around Black kids like this. And then, of course, teachers who had never had African American coworkers, and suddenly it wasn't just the kids, but the school itself was being transformed. And so it was just really that first day, that first week. I just remember the books being knocked out of my hands, which I was just completely discombobulated. I don't remember, and I vaguely remember people laughing, but I'm not sure that they were laughing at me. But I'm 13, I'm a little girl, I'm trying to get my books and trying to figure out what class I go to, and I have to say that was the start of 5 really difficult years at Newport News High School. And in a certain sense, I didn't realize how difficult until I was in the hallway again.
Wow. I want to go back a little bit before you came to that high school and in this situation. Yeah. Were you going to a school that was all Black?
No. So the first time I went to a school with white students was when I was in 7th grade. So the previous year I had gone to Magruder Elementary School, and that was a difficult time as well. But it felt different because I was 12 and I was the oldest student. I was in the oldest class. But I remember, I would be in the classroom and I loved school, and I just loved being in school. And I'm not quiet anyway. And when I had the answer, I waved my hand like this, and the teacher wouldn't call on me. I remember this very distinctly. So I went up to her and I said, "Well, you're not calling on me." And she said, "Well, you're too boisterous in the way you're behaving. You need to just raise your hand like this." Okay. So that's what I did. I raised my hand like this, and still she didn't call on me. Okay. So then I go up and I say, "Okay, I'm doing by the rules. I'm raising my hand. So you're still not calling on me. Why is that?" So then she began to call on me, but then she didn't call on my classmate. So I went over and I asked, "Well, what about Gail? She's always raised her hand the proper way."
The classmates that were Black?
Yes, classmates who were Black. She called on the white classmates all the time. And so you have to be decorous, apparently. So then Gail Branham, my classmate, was decorous, and she still wasn't calling on her. So I went over at 12 and asked, are you going to call on Gail? And so she began to do that. So, that was small compared to what I would experience in high school. But before that, I had gone to segregated schools. I mean, everybody was Black: the principal, the teachers, the janitor, and the students, and everybody else who was involved, and the secretaries. Everybody was Black. And while I certainly believe in integration and I believe in diversity in all aspects of our lives, there is something to be said when you're in a school and, the top of the chain and the bottom, if one is to say that about janitors, for whom I have great affection, because the janitor will do things for you, the principal will not. Everybody was Black. And so there was no question that you could be a teacher, you could be a principal, you could be a janitor if you were so inclined, because everybody was Black. And so then you have different issues, because you're kids and, kids are mean to each other. But certainly race was not a factor. And at that point, really, the only time I saw whites was when we went downtown.
How did that affect you growing up?
Well, I didn't think it was unusual. It felt normal to me. I mean, I didn't feel, you're in your neighborhood and you're running to the gas station and the little corner store and things like that. And then when it was time to go shopping, we would go downtown, and that's where we would see whites. And Yeah, that just felt normal. What seemed abnormal really was to be able to go to a school where people were white. That seemed unusual,
So
not
when
being in a segregated society.
so when you recognize the hallway, I mean, were you experiencing like post-traumatic stress from that time?
I think so. I was really taken aback, Matt, by the way I felt. I mean, I suddenly felt this rush of emotion and a kind of fear and anxiety that I had not felt for quite a long time. I mean, I hadn't been in that hallway for a long time, and I hadn't been in there since I was a teenager, and I didn't know. I really didn't know that it held for me that kind of memory. That was a surprise to me.
I mean, a lot of people have seen movies and dramatic portrayals of that time. What was it really like? I mean,
It was
is
difficult.
is it portrayed correctly the way it really was, or do they sugarcoat it?
Well, I mean, everybody's experience is somewhat different. I'm sure they sugarcoat it to some extent because I would say this much of the emotion that I felt was internalized. I didn't, I didn't say, even that's what was so shocking. I'm with a classmate. Um, it's been more than 50 years since we've been in the school. And it turns out she felt similar emotions that I felt, but we had never talked about it. I had never said, boy, being in that hallway is really rough, isn't it? I never talked about it to anybody. I never discussed it. I never talked about it. So much of it was on the interior. And then because we were so accustomed to being segregated, when we went to lunch, of course, the kids sat in a segregated way. Of course, the Black kids sat together, the white kids sat together. We had a couple of kids who were Asian, and then, but only maybe, I remember just one in my class, Cornell Carpenter, and then a couple who were Latino, and they were women, girls, so I think they were Latinas, and they they were neither white nor Black, and in Virginia when I grew up, those were the dominant races, and so they could sort of float between, but they kind of had to kind of sort of make a decision, I guess, about which group they were going to be with, because if they were with us, that would taint them, in the eyes of whites, I'm thinking, and so I would say the browner they were, the more they would be with us, and they were, and listen, there were always white students who really loved Black people, and so they saw them for whatever reasons. Perhaps in some cases they were gay and they were not out, of course, in Virginia then, and we didn't know that necessarily. But they would so anybody who sort of felt not accepted so much by the larger society would certainly become pals with us. So one of my dearest friends, many of them are white because they felt they also needed a refuge and they found it with us.
What were the triggers? I mean, what happened? Why did these emotions come to you?
Well, because there was a lot of mean stuff said and done in that high school.
Just
And
on a
much
daily
said
basis.
and done, I wouldn't say a daily basis, but certainly with great frequency. And it was done in the hallways. I mean, and then the teachers, I try to look at light most favorable to them. But we had a math teacher who, was particularly difficult if you were a black student. And she had a party and she invited only the white students. So for the eighth grader, she had a party at her house. She invited only the white students and they went. And I'm hoping that I recall this correctly, and I do think I do, though I have not confirmed it with my white classmates. And so she did that when we were in the eighth grade. And so they went unthinkingly. There would be no reason for them to wonder where the Black students were because we weren't friends. We didn't even know each other. I think it was early in the first semester. And then she did it again when we were in the 12th grade. And by then we had become friends. We had been in plays together. We had been in theater. I was in the band. We had become integrated in the school quite a lot. And she did it again. She had a party only for the white students. And they asked us, were we going? And we said, oh no, she hasn't invited. She's invited only the white students. And then they didn't go. And I always think that, that shows first we were children. And so we were in a position where we were learning about people who ultimately didn't look like we did, but we all shared the classes. We had worried about our grades, what we were going to do, what we were going to be when we grew up. And so by now we had developed friendships, and she had not, because to her, to an adult, 5 years is not as momentous as the time between 13 and 18. I mean, those are the years when you become, oh my goodness, how formative those years are. And so there would always be some little something. We'd have to correct a teacher. The governor of Virginia, Harry S. Byrd Sr., used to refer to Blacks in public as Negras. And so one of the teachers reading a book, where it says Negro, Negro, and she said Nigra, and we did not yell at her. We said, she said, she apologized. We said, we get it, we understand, but we just want you to know that it is wrong. And so there were always these little things that we would constantly have to correct. And I would say, and I was a smart kid. I made good grades. And so, but I was also an activist, just as I described being in seventh grade and speaking up for myself in terms of speaking. I had gotten that. So I'm going to back up a little bit. I tend to go around in circles sometimes, but I knew that I was a smart girl, not because of the way I was being treated in the school when I got to the first white high school. I knew that because I had been in a school with everybody Black. I had been to church where they said I was smart and I spoke well and all of that. So I did not have any feelings of inferiority in that sense. I did not feel like they were better than they might have felt that, but I certainly never did. I just thought they were different. That's all. And I was different from them. So I did not need their validation that I was that I was intelligent, that I could learn well. And so then I could be an activist. But so on one hand, white said I was difficult and very argumentative because I was defending us. And then Blacks, and this was the part that really was hurtful, said I was an Uncle Tom because I was working to make good grades. And it took me a long time to understand what they meant by that, because I think of an Uncle Tom as somebody who is doing something against the race, not somebody who's just trying to do a good job. But one of my former coworkers, Frank Metz, explained it to me. And he said, well, what they felt was that you were succumbing to the status quo, that you were just, going to let yourself do well. And then what? And I said, well,
becoming one of them, maybe.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I just saw a recent UNC, University of North Carolina graduate who said that his Black classmates referred to him as an Oreo, that he was Black on the outside and white on the inside. I will say that I hoped that those comments would not be made anymore, and that we would accept that we have smart people of all races, of all genders. It's sprinkled among us all.
Were there very much racial tensions there at the high school during that time?
Very much, very much. In fact, when I got out of high school, I had higher than normal blood pressure, they said, because I felt squeezed in the middle. I felt whites were, racist, but, particularly the kids growing and learning to be more open. And then I felt Blacks were critical of me for trying to succeed, for trying to do well. But there was no way I couldn't. I was in a family where all of my parents and their siblings were college educated. And that was unusual for people born between 1919 and 1936. And so that was an unusual period, and particularly if you're African American. But both families felt it was important that their children get an education. And so I had to go to college. I had things to do. So I really could not allow even the racism and prejudice that I encountered on a regular basis thwart me. And so I worked really hard to make sure that it didn't.
What did you do to maintain, I guess, your sanity in all of this?
Well, I went home every day. my parents were there, and because everybody is experiencing the same thing.
Yeah.
They're working. My mother had to sue to get her job at the Postal Service. When she applied for her job at the Postal Service in Newport News, Virginia, they told her they had their one colored person and they didn't need anyone else. And so she sued and she got a job. And so she experienced those tensions at work. My father worked at the shipyard, a very different environment. He had a college degree as well. And they would give blacks the most menial tasks. And so he would always say that the first day they gave him a broom and he was fighting for equality for the rest of his career there. And so it wasn't in isolation. That's what I think that's the message that I would like to give, that it was happening all around. It was just, I was a kid and it was happening to me, but it was happening to my parents as well. And then we found refuge in church, in our family, in our neighborhood. We moved to a neighborhood that had been a predominantly white neighborhood, but as more and more blacks moved, then whites moved out. And so now it is a completely segregated neighborhood again, even in the year 2023. And in fact, the US Congressman Bobby Scott, his mother was my science teacher. He lives in the neighborhood as well, in the most fabulous house at the end of the neighborhood, which is on the water. And so, but still, it's segregated. And I was there when I did go drive around my old neighborhood when I was there last month, and it still looked the same. And I did not see anyone who didn't look like I look. So, so some of the things in the South have not changed at all.
Well, it's interesting that, you talk about your experiences and a lot of people don't recognize that. I mean, people of color recognize it of a certain age, right?
Absolutely.
But here we are again, right? By striking down affirmative action.
Yes.
Your story is why we need affirmative action.
To me, there is no question about it. I mean, affirmative action, not negative action. And so it is a positive. And I think, we have always in America had affirmative action. It just wasn't based on race. It was based on something else. It was based on whom you knew, what college you went to, if your parents went to college, if you had money. We've always used something to distinguish us from each other. Oh, I'm better than you, or I have more than you do. And so it troubles me because, I've had people say, well, you would have probably succeeded anyway. Well, we'll never know, will we? Because
exactly.
I just know that I got opportunities to get an education at the premier high school in my city. I was named I earned the right to be valedictorian of that class. And that was an astonishing achievement. When I look back on it, at the time, it didn't seem so astonishing because I was doing the work and getting the grades. And so, but we weren't sure that I would get it, because they did change one rule. And actually it was interesting. They changed a rule that we actually thought should be changed, but it could have reduced my chances of my grade point average being high enough to be valedictorian. And so the rule was, before, whatever class you took, whatever your grade was, it counted toward your ranking in class. And the year I became a senior, they changed it so that they would judge you based on the quality of the classes. So you couldn't take home ec, which I'm sad to say that was not one of the big courses, because we all needed that ultimately if we're going to have a household. But if you took pre-calculus or something, that would be counted. But it didn't matter. By that point, I had my grade point average was high enough that I ended up being the first person in my class.
Were you the first Black person
Absolutely.
to be valedictorian? And the last?
Yes,
because that was
that.
Wow.
Because it's no longer Newport News High School, right?
No, and one of the few in the country to be at a predominantly white high school, to be a Black person who ended up getting that earning that distinction. But again, it was a double-edged sword, because it was celebrated by us, but it didn't feel as celebrated by certainly Blacks were not celebrating it. Obviously my friends were, but I'm saying the group. And then because they said, again, I was an Uncle Tom because otherwise I wouldn't have had grades good enough for that.
But your
And
family obviously
oh,
was
yes, of
celebrating it.
course, of course.
Sure.
And of course, the people at church. And so I was surrounded by people who were very excited and very thrilled. But no, it was an affirmative act. And it was an act of bravery on the parts of our parents. They were sending their precious little ones. We regard children with such oh my goodness, we make them porcelain dolls now. Well, they didn't do that then. They just said, get out there. This is
Yeah.
the world you face, and you're going to have to buck up and get used to being in that world now. And so they sent us there believing that this was the right thing to do, that this was the thing that the civil rights movement was all about, having equal opportunity to excel, to succeed, to learn, and then go on to glorious futures. I mean, that's what they believed in with all their hearts. So it never even crossed my mind that I wouldn't go to that high school. I assumed I would, because everything that my parents were doing, my father particularly was an activist. There are so many activists whose names we will never know. I happen to know his because he was my dad, and he was out there marching and protesting at work to his detriment. There were positions he didn't get because of his argumentative nature and the fact that he just said he could not say nothing. And I inherited that.
It sounds like it from what everybody told you. So Debbie, in going through this experience, because really you've kind of gone back home, you've I guess reawakened memories that were not so easy to deal with at the time, which I think all of us can relate to some degree, the three of us here. But what do you take away from this now?
Well, what I take away from it is actually a sense of great hopefulness, because yes, we were traumatized, and whatever we were, by the experience that we had at Newport News High School. But, we were a part of history. We did help pave the way for all of the generations to come. And we didn't know that at the time. We weren't thinking about that at the time. We were 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. You're not thinking about making history. And so I am happy in some ways that people don't really know what it was like. I'm happy for that, because that means we've made great progress. So obviously there's more to do, but it does show you the human beings can and do change, even as they resist, even as they fight, even as they do everything in their power not to do something, they change. And so my classmates changed. They changed. They were different people at the end of the 5 years, because after all, they too had made the choice to go to Newport News High School. They didn't have to do that. They could have gone to another school, but they had signed up as well to go. And so their parents must have seen something. At least that's how I recall it. And so, but for us, we were blazing a trail, and look, we may suffer some of the trauma that we experienced that we weren't even aware of particularly, but it was for a good cause. It was for a good cause. It was to make all of us better in this country, and I think we are better. I think that, I would say that my experiences, instead of making me bitter about things, I feel hopeful. I believe there's good in everybody. And I really, truly believe that. That doesn't mean you always find it, but I seek it. And I also think that I do believe that the arc does bend toward justice. I think it takes time. And I do think, and this is what I think a lot about. I do think that there will not be a day when, the clouds will part, the sun will come out, and, balloons will fall from the sky and everything will be glorious. We will always have to fight to be treated equally. That will be so no matter who we are. That will be so whether you're white or Black or Asian or Latino or Native American, that the fight will not end. But it does show that we can make a difference, and that by fighting, by being in the game, by being present, then we can make it so that this country ultimately does reflect all of the wonderful, amazing, incredible people who live in it and who have made it the great country that it is today.
We need your sunshine every day, because I think I'm glad you're positive about it, because I have to admit some days it's just not, and lately especially, it's been difficult for me to feel that way. It's interesting in you telling us this story now, because I spent part of my day with two high school buddies that we grew up together, and we spent part of the day talking about the racial issues that we faced. You know, one guy's Filipino and half Puerto Rican, the other guy is Mexican American, just like me. And we just, we revert to talking about how did we manage to make it through that? Because there is still those things that we think about and how people had pegged us in a certain way. But
absolutely,
one guy's a lawyer, one guy's a very successful in his business, and
and you've been a successful broadcaster.
I'm just trying. So
Well, it's interesting. People our age, around our age, carry a lot of trauma that is never revealed.
Yes,
because that's just the way it was. I think that's one of the things that is better now. People do talk about it. I mean, people don't like to talk about race. I remember I was in some kind of UW seminar, and they go like, well, why do people of color always talk about race? Because our life is impacted by it every minute we're alive.
Absolutely. There's no way for you to avoid the topic. Right. Look, I'd love to avoid the topic, but you can't. Well, no, I think we have been traumatized. I agree with you. But I think also that, when I was in Rhode Island, I worked in Providence, Rhode Island, covering the news for 15 years before I came here. And I would go to events like, because of it's on the water, and I thought I would cover those stories here, but there they have races, the Newport to Bermuda race and all of that, and the New York Yacht Club would be there, and then I would show up, to cover it, and there would be a little flicker, say, "Yep, I'm all you got. I'm the one who's covering this story," and so, gosh, I would never have had, how would I have even been able to navigate that had I not had some of the experiences that I had? Also, I have to say, I went to Hampton University and HBCU, and that saved my life and saved my sanity, because then I didn't have to worry about race at all. Then all the other stuff that human beings do to each other, I had to be concerned about. Did I have on the right clothes? Was I friends with the right people? And that sort of thing. And so that saved me. Then I went to Ohio State for graduate school, and then I was able to handle that because I was much older. So that intermediary step of going to Hampton, and that wasn't my first choice, that really saved my life. And it made it so that I could see that in some ways, in so many ways, we are so alike. When we took out the issue of race, we acted the same way. There are people we didn't like, people we didn't talk to, people we loved, people we fell in love with, people didn't fall in love with us, but we loved them. It was just a human experience. And so that taught me that everything that I experienced was human. That's actually what we're talking about. And that's what we share, whether or not we agree with that. It doesn't matter. We share it anyway.
This has been great because people watch you every night on the news, and I'm sure they've never heard about this part of you. And I think it's wonderful that people now, hopefully people will come up to you and ask you about this.
Well, I think it's great too, because then you get to know what someone has experienced.
Yes.
And I think we all have experienced and have our own stories that, people don't, they would find them, whoa, you experienced that, you did that. I know that I've told my kids that, and they've, been surprised numerous times. But I think it's also just great that you are willing to open up about this.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, once I wrote it, I thought, once I wrote it to myself and I looked at it, and I was at my former pastor's wife's house, which she's his widow now. And I read it to her, and she said, you need to put that on, especially because it's Juneteenth. That happened to be Monday. June. I didn't write it because of that, but it just happened that it was that day. And I thought, because I'm aware if I put something out, that it could be seen by various people. I will say I did not expect this. So thank you so much for asking me to talk about it more. But it was important to me to say it, and it was important to me because of as you say, I think people forget they don't imagine that we experienced this. They don't know what we have experienced to get to where we are. And so it's important that we are the sum of all of our experiences. There isn't just one thing. We're not, we think other people are unidimensional, but we know that we are multidimensional. Well, I'm multidimensional.
Right.
And so I've had many experiences. And may I say, it's not as though I've had a racism-free time here in Seattle. I mean, I've certainly not had.
I know about that. I think all three of us
I haven't had things quite as blatant as in the South. I always say, that they actually know how to be bigots there. They've had, and so the ones here, well, okay, they're trying.
Well, here it's sort of underneath the radar type of thing, and it's I'd rather have somebody just like get in front of my face and tell me what it is, then but it's a bit different here. I got to ask you, how long? Okay, you've been at KIRO how long?
I've been at KIRO for 32 years.
Wow. And how much longer?
People ask me that, and I don't really know. I was actually thinking of retire. I mean, obviously, I think about when will I retire, and I was thinking about it. But now we have a new news director, and I'm really excited about yours. And I haven't been excited about. Well, it's not that I haven't been excited. I always find something to love about what I do and the people for whom I work. But she's brought a level of excitement and interest and shown me that, wow, there's a little more you could learn as well, Debbie Horne. And I just love that. And so I don't know. We'll see. And I will stay as long as I feel that I can do the job. And but I won't stay forever. This year I went back to the East Coast 4 times, and 3 times were for funerals of dear relatives of mine. And so we all know that life is finite, but nothing reminds us of it more than those we knew as children coming to the end of their lives. And so, but as long as I have a good time, and I dreamed of being a television reporter as a little girl. Why that is, I do not know. I'd never even thought about any barriers or that my race would be a factor. It never crossed my mind. And so I feel very fortunate every day to get to do what I dreamed of.
Well, you deserve a huge award for being a general assignment reporter for as long as you have, because that is not an easy thing, especially in these days and these times. It's a changing thing. So,
boy, it really.
Yeah, Debbie, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. And hey, we'll just keep watching you on the news and know that you have a great story to tell.
Oh, Enrique and Matt, thank you so much. This has been such a joy, and I am always appreciative when someone wants to talk about something that I think is important, the relations that we've had in this country and the fact that we can and we will be better.